Now, Senator Kelleher, you have 5 minutes.
Very much. Kind of questions starting with the SRI, but some of them will cross over to NESE. You state very clearly that land costs are a substantial portion of the overall cost of building homes. So, and you come very down strongly on the site tax. So, do you think that that measure needs to sit alongside any legislation around the Land Development Act, and that that is a necessary part of that package? So that's one question. I'm very, very interested in the, I suppose, really a big concern. We are handing over an enormous public asset. It belongs to all of us, these publicly held lands. And we need to be absolutely sure that in this handover, that we are getting what we need out of it in the transfer. And what we need is social and affordable homes. So it would seem to me, like you suggest, that that should be the sole objective of the Land Development Agency. And I was very concerned when I read in the Heads of Bill that the general scheme makes clear that the LDA must also have regard to the policy of the government on proper planning and sustainable development and contribute to the economic and social development of the state, whilst at the same time obtaining a positive financial return for the state. So that seems to be a difficulty, and I think we need to look at that in the drafting of the bill as part of public scrutiny, because we see a situation, and it isn't to do with public land, but we have, for example, Besborough, which is held by the nuns, is up for sale at the moment. And that isn't in public ownership, but there are other similar lands, and there's very little that anybody can do about that disposal of an asset. And I suppose I'm also interested in the type, I'm interested in the equation. 10% social housing for this huge giveaway seems to be a bad deal to me. Secondly, what is affordable? A big debate going on is 310,000 affordable. I don't think it particularly is for people on an average wage. So the definition of that, your view on that. And also, if it isn't the 10% social, 30% affordable and 60% market, is your view that we could move to a higher proportion of social and affordable in that policy? And also the mix. How do we make sure that we get the right mix out of the giveaway of public lands to the LDA? According to the summary of social housing assessments in 2018, 47% of the 72,000 households on local authority waiting lists are single-person households. Of over the 100,000 people who are homeless, just over 4,000 are single homeless people. The National Housing First Implementation Plan published last year requires an additional 750 to 800 one-bed properties for people so as they can move out of these hostels and those places that are not good for anybody. Housing First provides immediate access. So you get the point that I'm making. How do we make sure that we, in this transfer of land that we all own today, how do we make sure that it achieves the goals that we need? Is balancing a return to the state something that should be dropped? And is the only objective achieving housing and the type of housing that we need? Just some other questions. The permanent affordability. You know, again, I really like the idea, but I wonder what in law needs to be there to ensure that that is the outcome of this transfer. I'm interested in the ownership and the retention of a state interest. And I know that, for example, in Singapore, where they built significant numbers of housing, they retained a lease. There was a 99-year lease on any properties that were bought as a result of subsidised mortgages. And again, leasing came up by both of you, and I'm interested in that, so that the state doesn't, if you like, give everything away and retains an interest. And just again, to look at models like Vienna and Freiburg, the mix there wouldn't be 60%, I would imagine, market. It would be different to that, and I know that that needs to be adjusted. I think that's There are enough questions for now, but I'd really like your comments on those questions that I've raised.
Okay, thanks, Senator. I'll start with Kieran. Do you want to start off there?
Yeah, and Conor might come in on the on some of the affordability, specifically affordability issues. I think your first point is very well made. And again, it goes back to my response to Deputy Casey. That I think, you know, we have to look at land overall and ensure that we have, you know, as freely available, that land is as freely available as far as housing is concerned as possible. That means that you're looking at land that's obviously held either by the state or land that's held privately, and identifying what are the measures that we can take to ensure that that land comes from both sources. So on the state side, I think that's why the Land Development Agency is potentially a very, very good idea, that it can help to free up the bottlenecks and to ensure that land is more freely available from that perspective. And then, you know, as I said, we've talked about the vacant site levy as a way of ensuring that land isn't a bottleneck as far as, you know, from a privately owned perspective, and so that we get land being more freely available from both sources, if you like. So I think that's why I very much agree with your suggestion or what you asserted at the start, that it's both going hand in hand, essentially, in terms of addressing the issue. I think in terms of getting the mix, I mean, certainly my own view would be that as far as, you know, the social and affordable, you know, getting the right mix, if you like, in terms of how much social, how much affordable versus how much, if you like, that's determined or available at market prices. I mean, my own preference clearly would be that the weighting should be more on the social than the affordable. I think, given the nature and the circumstances of where we're at right now, and given the nature of the bottlenecks that are in the market, maybe in terms of the actual parameterisation and the precise, you know, ratios, if you like. I mean, I don't think we could necessarily identify those figures right now, but I mean, maybe Conor could talk a little bit about the affordability work, which I think would be a very good way of giving an insight into that perspective.
Yeah, so as I said earlier, when you pick particular parameters, say 40% or 30%, you put very strict cut-offs as to what the delivery should or shouldn't be. And to me, I certainly don't have any evidence that would push me to give an alternative parameterization. However, what I would say is that, you know, it's very clear when you look at the profile of households and how much they can afford in their housing costs and what's needed to deal with those where there are affordability challenges. You know, delivering affordable units for those who can purchase them sustainably, for those who can rent them sustainably, and then social housing provision for those who don't have sufficient incomes for those alternative tenures, is where we will get the most societal return for this investment. And that's what, as I've said, having a key objective of agencies like this to meet those needs, I think is important.
So do you think that should be strengthened in the bill?
Well, certainly I think it would be, you know, a key objective of the organisation should be to deliver affordable homes. I think that, in particular where they're using state lands, and the key issue is they're trying to take that speculative element out of the land price and make sure that's passed all the way down to the household at the end. I think it has to be a critical issue for an organisation like this. You know, I guess, you know, for an agency like this, it's going to get involved, you know, certainly as a secondary objective. You can see it may get involved in public-private partnerships or more broadly. In that context, I think it is important that there is a recognition that it should make a return to the state to make sure that when it gets involved, it makes sure that the state gets the most out of it, where a private development might need just a little bit of support or might need some sort of funding to move over the line. And in that case, the organisation should have the flexibility to be able to do that, but maximise the return. So I think having a broad remit is a good thing, but with affordability as a core objective of that.
Okay.
Can I just add briefly, sorry, just before I hand over to Larry, is that some of the work we've been doing, using particularly the SILC, the Survey in Income and Living Conditions, I think can give you a good idea, because you had a very specific question about what is affordable. I think some of the work that we've been doing on the SILC and continue to do on the SILC can give you a very good idea as to what exactly is affordable.
So that's something for us as a committee to take note of.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Thank you.
Sorry.
No?
Sorry. Just Nolan talked about the permanent affordability in more detail, and I think it's said in our open statement at a very general level. I think everybody this side of the room thinks it needs to be in as one of the objectives about affordability. I think it's interesting and I think important in its submission to you that what John Coleman said about how they would work out affordability. I mean, it's a very detailed assessment that he outlined where they will look at the income deciles in a particular area and then they work back from that to what the price of the land should be. And I think that is the model. Okay. That is how you should work it out. And that sets the parameter then for
that's
what
reassuring.
Yeah, and I think that's what they said was really, really important. Just maybe to say one thing, just so I'm clear. So for me, if a site tax, and I think we really have to be careful the words we use. So there's a vacant site levy, that's one thing, and there's a site value tax. They're very different things. A vacant site levy will increase the cost. Okay, I mean, it doesn't decrease it. That puts a cost on the development from a developer's perspective. So the reason it's useful, as Kieran said, is it provokes supply. It's somebody sitting on land and it's doing. But there, as we've said, there are administrative difficulties around. A site value tax is a very, very different thing, and we're happy to provide more details. But it would be a replacement to the property tax. I mean, that's what you're talking about. You're talking about a tax that would be levied on every site that exists in an area. The value of that would be worked out irrespective of the buildings that are on it. Okay. So that is a very different. I mean, that would be a profound change. So that's why I keep saying we can't mix those two things up.
No, I understand.
And that would be a tax that would be placed, or a site value tax placed on all sites. So if you take a particular area of Dublin, you set a site value tax. If somebody now is holding land, they're paying now a tax on that land as they sit on it, but everybody is paying a site value tax. So if the Dublin City Corporation make an investment in infrastructure that improves the value of all sites in that area, all values should, in theory at least, work up. So I would say the site value tax is something that if it's to be considered, it needs quite a bit of work to be done on it, to be worked out. So I suppose my suggestion is it's way beyond the Land Development Agency. It's a big, big question.
Yeah,
for
it's outside
the committee.
of the legislation, but it needs to perhaps sit alongside as
exactly.
well.
And it is something that I think we certainly in NESC and the NESC Council are very interested in the idea of scoping out what the site value tax might look at. If the committee were supportive of that work, it's certainly something we think Irish society could do with having a much more detailed look at what that model, because it would change the dynamic quite significantly in terms of how land is held.
Any comments on the type of housing? So, we had ghost estates, places were built in the wrong place that nobody wanted to live, and then we had all the troubles with that. How do we make sure that not only is it affordable, there's security of tenure in those homes and the price is stable over time, but also that they're the right type of housing in the right place? Any comments on that?
Well, absolutely. I mean, and it has been long the case, the NEST view that the goal of housing policy is to provide housing, affordable housing in the right place and where it's needed, and that needs to. So, I mean, I think for the LGA, it's clearly part of their remit that they would try to build the right type of housing. I mean, even the fact that they're focusing on urban areas. So, I'm not sure if I have a short answer to your question, but
I suppose what should be in the legislation to ensure that outcome, I suppose, because we're doing the detailed scrutiny.
Maybe what I could offer in that is that I know that the Department of Housing is conducting a kind of a housing needs assessment. So, and we're doing some work for them on that basis, where we're trying to estimate. So a lot of people have looked at the kind of structural demand estimate overall nationally in the country. We're doing some work now which will feed in, I think, to what the department are doing, which is essentially trying to estimate that at a county by county and even possibly down to a local authority level. It's always fraught with detail when you get down to a very granular level, but nonetheless, hopefully what that will do at least is provide a framework for what is actually needed in different parts of the country, rather than giving rise to the issue you talked about, the ghost estates, where you're building huge amounts of housing in an area where there really isn't any need for it.
Just one last part of your question, Deputy, and Noel might talk then about the permanent affordability. I think you asked an important question about whether the legislation should drop the return to the state clause in it. Well, I mean, for me, I think one of the key aims of the LDA as it's conceived is to try to ensure that our investment in housing will be counter-cyclical, and therefore in a sense, well, one of the ways to do that is that it's off balance sheet. Now, I mean, one of the requirements of that will be that they will have to, the commercial bases will need to be in it in terms of classification. So it's a balance between that, and I think if you take that out, then you will undermine their ability to be off balance sheet, and then that has another knock-on effect. So I think it's the key, and as Conor was saying, it is to find a way that can be, both goals can be made compatible, and also commercial return. I mean, not to put in legislation, but I mean, it's the level of that return is key. I mean, as to what types of returns are you expecting, for
well,
the
enough
states?
homes for us in Ireland would be a fantastic social return, wouldn't it?
Well, absolutely, yeah, but I mean, in terms of the level of commercial return, are we are 4% or 8%, or, so that's important. So Noel might just say on the to specifics on the permanent affordability.
Yeah, okay, thanks. So I suppose with permanent affordability, I mean, then there's various different ways it can be achieved. I mean, social housing is, well, and actually social housing is permanently affordable, although, well, at least up to the point, okay, then tenant purchase, okay, when tenant purchase comes in.
Other days' work.
If you don't, and some of social housing, actually if it's the housing associations, they don't do tenants purchase, so that is permanently affordable. Then, I mean, the idea we had on cost rental accommodation, so that rents pitched at sort of suited for middle income households. I mean, the idea that we want to keep that also, that should be also permanently affordable. Then, okay, with owner occupation, I mean, I think while it's not a common model elsewhere, but you can, with owner occupation, permanent affordability would mean having a mechanism in place to regulate the resale price, so that, I mean, for houses developed on this basis, that you'd regulate the resale price so that it, and you maybe regulate the extent of appreciation, so that it is affordable for the next purchaser as well. And yeah, so and leasing the land is a mechanism. Is that could be that would enable you to do that, because you would that would, if the public body continue to own the lease, then they could regulate the retail price. Which, and yes, as you mentioned, yes, Singapore, they do, and okay, and they have a very, well, there's the state plays a huge role in their housing system in supplying houses, and yes, and they retain the land there, and they have, yes, leases, as you say. Maybe closer to home, Amsterdam City Council, they also have a policy, well, they had, actually going way back, they adopted a policy of leasing the land rather than selling it. Now, it didn't, actually, not all the housing was affordable. I mean, but it did reduce speculation, so that the city, in fact, I think owns, well, has sort of the land element. It owns something like 80% of the land, although they've moved now towards they now sell land. So, but I think it is. I mean, and it's, but yeah, and I think it is a useful mechanism that could be used.
Okay, thank you, Noel. Owen?
Just allowing to get Senator Keller in as well.
I'm actually going to be very brief.
Yes, okay.
I mean, I suppose we need to remind ourselves that the market has failed to provide homes for our population, and this is what it's all about. 10,000 people, 3,700 of whom are children. We signed off a report this morning on family and child homelessness, which shows the impact on those children today, but into their futures. So this is a very serious matter. The LDA proposal is a response to that failure, and we are proposing a very significant transfer, a giveaway of, as a deputy alongside me said, 1.2 billion of public assets. That's huge. That's very, very big. And it's off balance sheet, and because of that, then you have all the interface with the market. And there are huge incentives for profits in housing. That's a reality. So in order to mitigate those, I guess, I just think it would be very helpful to have specific, and you may not have them today, specific proposals for the bill that's in front of us to mitigate that potential market failure coming into the space of the Land Development Agency. But also, so how can we get for it to be more of a Vienna model than a model where the market fails again, but now with state assets handed over quite easily? And also, how do we retain the public interest in those lands that we're transferring? So any thoughts that you have on that? And if you don't have them today, we'd like to hear from them.
Thank you very much, Senator Kelleher. Might go to yourself, Larry.
I suppose, yeah, I mean, we felt that some of the things we were suggesting about the specific thing about putting affordability as an explicit objective is, I mean, I think we're all agreed that that would be quite useful. I'm not sure whether it's the right place for it to feature in legislation, but we do think that the cost rental project needs to be a strategic priority that they would pursue, and that will make an enormous difference. If the scale of development they potentially would do, it would make a big impact. And so they would be the two pieces that we would say are key.
Thank you. Yourself, Kieran.
Yeah, no, I mean, I basically agree with what Larry has said. I mean, I think, with greater emphasis on the social side, whatever is the most appropriate way to articulate that, I think certainly would hope. I mean, I guess, given the nature of what is being proposed, it's about a balancing act and a weighting and where the balance falls. So I think having a greater emphasis on the social side is possibly one way in which that could be achieved.
Yourself, Conor?
Yeah, I guess, in general, when you look at a number of the comments, they all come back to the same theme of trying to make sure that this agency maximises the amount to which it contributes to the affordability challenge in Ireland. And I think that you can see there's uniformity across this group, and that is the issue, and that, the extent to which this agency, look, when we look back and we measure the performance of it, to me, it will be the extent to which it has helped solve that crisis. And, the complexity of the vehicle structure in terms of its off-balance or on-balance sheet nature, it's not something we've done any work on. However, I think that best efforts should be used to ensure that whatever mechanism is needed to make sure that it delivers the affordable and social, that's where the benefit comes from, and the structure should be aligned with achieving that goal. Would be my perspective on that.
Thank you very much. Right. You're satisfied with that? Fantastic. Okay. Well, I'd like